The ground trembled once more. Admiral Vex Corrin pressed his scaled palms to the fractured walls of the command center, feeling the tremors echo through his bones. Beyond the shattered windows, his homeworld burned. Xanthus Prime, once the crown jewel of the Xanthari Empire, for over 3 millennia now resembled a dying star. Corrin staggered across the rubble-strewn floor toward the emergency communications console. His left leg dragged uselessly behind him, mangled when the ceiling collapsed 2 hours earlier. He was the final surviving officer of high command. The others had perished when the void swarm tore through their orbital defenses like tissue paper. The Xanthari had ruled this region of space for ages. Their technology surpassed the dreams of most species. Their warships could reduce worlds to ash. Their shields could withstand any known weapon. But none of it mattered now. The void swarm had come in. Nothing could stop them. Corrin's eyes flicked to the battle screens overhead, displaying the chaos unfolding in orbit. The last 3 dreadnoughts of the Xanthari fleet were locked in their final stand. Each vessel was a floating fortress, larger than a metropolis. They had safeguarded the Confederation for centuries. Now, they were losing. The void swarm moved. Like a storm of mechanized, locust giant constructs, each the size of a building, swarming with eerie precision. They had no crews, no emotions, no hesitation. Machines built solely to devour everything in their path. The flagship Eternal Glory fired its main weapon. A lance of raw energy pierced the void and struck a swarm construct dead center. For a moment, the machine glowed white-hot, then kept advancing, undeterred. Moments later, its return fire shredded the dreadnought's shields like they were vapor. The ship began to fracture. Corrin watched as escape pods jettisoned from the doomed vessel. Most would never make it to the planet's surface. The swarm was already hunting them, one by one. He turned from the display. There was nothing left he could do. The fleet had fought valiantly, but the battle was lost. The war was over. The Xanthari Confederation was dying. The emergency beacon sat waiting on the console, before him their final chance. Though Corrin knew it was almost certainly in vain. The signal would transmit a distress call across the galaxy. Any civilization, with faster-than-light travel, would receive it. But who would answer? The Xanthari had always held themselves above others. They'd scorned alliances and refused council seats. They had believed they were strong enough to stand alone. Now, they were dying alone. With trembling fingers, Corrin activated the beacon. The machine thrummed softly to life, lights blinking in sequence. The signal launched into hyperspace, destined to reach every major world in hours. The message was clear and concise. This is Admiral Vex Corrin, of the Xanthari Confederation. Our world is under siege by the Void Swarm. We are requesting immediate assistance from any civilization with faster-than-light capabilities. Please respond. The coordinates to Xanthus Prime followed. Then the beacon began to repeat the message on a loop. Corrin leaned back in his chair and let out a bitter, hollow laugh. What had he hoped for? The rebellion factions were scattered and weak. The crystalline hierarchy had likely already judged the Xanthari as deserving of extinction. Other major powers were probably weighing how best to profit from their fall. The Void Swarm had emerged 6 months ago, deep in Xanthari space. At first, the Confederation assumed it was a routine invasion, just another enemy to crush. They had faced countless threats over the centuries. But this was different. The Swarm didn't negotiate. They issued no demands, no ultimatums. They arrived and annihilated. Whole planets vanished, stripped of every resource, every electron, metal, energy, biomass. It all fed the Swarm's endless expansion. The Xanthari military had launched every weapon at their disposal. Nothing worked. Nuclear warheads barely dented the Swarm's armor. Plasma arrays were absorbed without trace. Even their most sophisticated prototypes had no effect. The machines adapted. They evolved with each engagement. Every tactic the Xanthari employed was countered in the next battle. Corrin's thoughts drifted to his family. His mate and children had been stationed in the outer colonies when the swarm first struck. He hadn't received a word from them in weeks. The colonies were gone, now devoured by unrelenting machines. He was likely the last of his lineage. Another tremor shook the structure as distant explosions rocked the city. Through the jagged openings in the wall, Corrin could see them now, swarm constructs descending into the streets. Walking on metallic limbs like enormous spiders, they moved between burning buildings, searching for survivors. Still, the beacon pulsed on, broadcasting its message, again and again and again. Corrin knew it was futile. Even if someone received the signal, if they wanted to help, they would arrive too late. Xanthus Prime would be completely consumed within days. Then the swarm would move on, from one system to the next, until nothing remained in the galaxy. Still, he kept the beacon transmitting. It was all he had left. Maybe somewhere, someone would hear their call. Maybe someone would remember that the Xanthari once stood among the stars. Perhaps someone would learn from their failure and find a way to stop the swarm before it devoured everything. The lights flickered inside the command center. The building's power grid was dying. Soon, the beacon would fall silent, and with it, the final voice of the Xanthari Confederation would vanish forever. Corrin shut his eyes and waited. Above, the stars burned with the fire of shattered warships. Around him, his home turned to ruin, and across the stars, his last desperate message rushed through the void, searching for someone who might care enough to answer. Lieutenant. Commander Jake Harrison stood before the towering screen inside Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station. The alien transmission had been playing for 6 hours straight, even filtered through translation software. The desperation in that voice was unmistakable. "Someone's out there," he murmured, "and they're begging for help." "Play it again, Lisa," Jake said to the technician beside him. Lisa Martinez tapped the control. The static-filled voice echoed once more. "This is Admiral Vex Corrin of the Xanthari Confederation. Our world is under attack by the Void Swarm. We are requesting immediate assistance from any civilization capable of faster-than-light travel. Please respond." Jake had heard it dozens of times. It still gave him chills. The Xanthari were one of the Galaxies' most advanced civilizations. If they were calling for aid, things were dire. "Coordinates confirmed," Lisa said, eyes locked on the data stream. "Signal originates from the Xanthari home system, roughly 2,847 light-years out. That's a long way to go just to fight someone else's war," muttered Sergeant Mike Chen, monitoring the Gamma rays. "Especially for a species that's never acknowledged us." Jake nodded. The Xanthari had first contacted Earth 15 years ago, but barely engaged. To them, humanity was just another backwater species. Their ships could cross the galaxy in days. Humans had only cracked faster-than-light travel 5 years ago. The comm center doors opened. Captain Ben Rogers stepped in, tall and weathered, his hair gray with time. He'd led Earth's Deep Space Command since first contact. "Status update?" Rogers asked. "The message is genuine, sir," Jake replied. "Definitely from Xanthus Prime. The Xanthari are under assault by something called the Void Swarm." Rogers frowned. "Never heard of them. What do we know?" "Nothing, sir. This is the first mention we've seen. But if they're overwhelming the Xanthari, they're not to be taken lightly." Lisa looked up. "Sir, I'm detecting similar distress signals from 3 other star systems. All mention the Void Swarm. Whatever this is, it's spreading." Rogers went quiet. He approached the wide window, watching Earth's orbital defenses drift across space like silent sentinels. "What's the fleet status?" he asked. Fifth Fleet is fully assembled, sir, Jake said. Admiral Kate Sullivan is on standby. 200 ships, fully armed and resupplied. 200, Rogers echoed grimly. Against an enemy that's beaten the Xanthari. Silence filled the room. Everyone knew what that meant. The Xanthari had thousands of ships each, more powerful than anything Earth could construct. If even they couldn't stop the swarm, what hope did humanity have? Lisa spoke softly. Should we alert the Galactic Council? See what their response is? Rogers laughed, but it was bitter. The Council, they'll debate for weeks. Committees, delays, arguments, while people die. Mike shook his head. Sir, with respect, this isn't our war. The Xanthari never lifted a finger for us. Why risk our lives now? Jake stared at the screen, the alien signal still playing. He pictured Kororan, alone on that crumbling world, sending a final plea into the void, because it's the right thing to do. He said. Rogers turned away from the window. Exactly. He tapped his communicator. Admiral Sullivan, this is Captain Rogers. You have full clearance to launch. What are our orders? Came the Admiral's voice. Proceed to the Xanthari system at maximum speed. Assist any survivors you find. Rogers paused. And make sure they know we're not arriving as conquerors. We're coming as friends. Understood, sir. Fleet launching within the hour. Rogers ended the transmission and looked around. I know what you're all thinking. This is madness, sending our forces into the unknown for aliens who barely noticed us. Yes, sir, Mike said with a grin. That's exactly what we're thinking. Good, Rogers replied. Means we're still human. Within the hour, Earth's Fifth Fleet was in motion. From orbital docks around Earth and the Moon, the ships rose, engines blazing, heavy cruisers, swift destroyers, carrier-class vessels packed with fighters. Medical ships and supply craft followed close behind. At the fleet's heart was the ESS Liberty, Earth's newest and most formidable dreadnought. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge, watching her formation align. All ships reporting. Ready, Admiral? Said her comms officer. Excellent. Signal the fleet, Sullivan said. Prepare for hyperspace jump on my mark. She glanced at the stars one last time. Earth was now a fading dot behind them. Ahead lay mystery, ding, purpose mark. The stars stretched into luminous lines as the fleet surged into hyperspace. 200 human vessels cut across the darkness, bound for a dying world, to aid a people they had never met, against a threat they couldn't yet understand. Back on Earth, Jake Harrison stared at the screen as the last sensor blip vanished. Think they'll make it in time? Lisa asked. I don't know, Jake said, but I know they'll try. He paused. That's what humans do. In the monitoring station, the Xanthari distress call still played. But now, it wasn't alone. Earth's reply was on its way, traveling at light speed toward Xanthus Prime, carrying just 4 words. Hold on, help is coming. Admiral Kate Sullivan gripped the railing on the bridge of the ESS Liberty as her fleet emerged from hyperspace. The sight that greeted her through the main view screen turned her stomach. The Xanthus system resembled a cosmic graveyard. Thousands of massive metal forms drifted through the void like lethal insects. Each one was colossal, larger than the tallest buildings on Earth, and they swarmed through the wreckage of what had once been a formidable fleet. The remains of the Xanthari warships floated like shattered toys, smoldering and broken. Dear God, whispered Communications Officer Amy Chen, her eyes locked onto the readouts in disbelief. There's nothing left of their fleet. Scan for survivors, Sullivan ordered. And get me a full tactical analysis on those constructs. Commander. Rick Davis worked quickly at his console, his expression tightening as he absorbed the data. Admiral, he said grimly, the energy output from each of those constructs is off the charts. Every single one is generating power comparable to our entire ship. A cold weight settled in Sullivan's chest. Earth's fleet was formidable, but these machines looked unstoppable. How many are we dealing with? Over 10,000 distinct contacts, ma'am, Rick replied. And more are being created as we speak. He transferred an image to the main screen. It showed one of the swarm constructs dismantling a wrecked Xanthari ship, absorbing the debris into its frame and expanding in size. On the surface of Xanthus Prime, Admiral Kuran sat slumped in his devastated command center. His 4 eyes remained fixed on the few operational sensor displays. New ships had entered the system. They were smaller than Xanthari dreadnoughts and bore an unfamiliar, less advanced design, but they moved with precise coordination. Kuran transmitted a warning, his voice trembling from fatigue and a fragile thread of hope. Unknown vessels. This is Admiral Kuran of the Xanthari Confederation. You must retreat at once. The Void Swarm cannot be stopped. Save yourselves while you still can. The reply came swiftly. The voice, though heavily accented, was clear and firm. Admiral Kuran. This is Admiral Sullivan of the Earth United Fleet. We received your distress call. We've come to help. Kuran's eyes widened. Earth. He vaguely recalled the report's primitive beings from a distant, underdeveloped world. Their technology lagged thousands of years behind that of the Xanthari. Their ships were outdated and fragile by comparison. Admiral Sullivan, Kuran said, voice laced with urgency. You don't understand. These machines have wiped out civilizations older than ours. Your weapons won't even scratch them. With respect, Sullivan replied calmly. You haven't seen what humans do when someone's in danger. Back aboard the Liberty, Sullivan turned to Rick. I need options. Can we damage them? Rick reviewed his data quickly. Our primary cannons might breach their outer shells, but they self-repair fast. Their shields are neutralizing nearly everything we throw at them in the sims. What about their movement? Are they acting like a traditional fleet tour? More like individual units? They're definitely coordinated, ma'am. Highly synchronized. They're acting like they're all linked, Rick said slowly, eyes narrowing. Then he froze, staring at his monitor. Wait, Admiral. I'm picking up heavy data transmissions between the constructs. They're constantly exchanging information. Sullivan's expression sharpened. They're networked, like nodes in a computer system. Yes, ma'am, Rick confirmed. A massive, highly sophisticated one. For the first time since entering the Xanta system, Sullivan allowed herself a small smile. Then maybe we've got a shot after all. Amy, she ordered, turning to her communications officer. Alert the fleet, prepare for full-scale electronic warfare protocols. But the Void Swarm had already noticed them. The constructs began shifting formation, turning toward the human fleet. Their weapons pulsed to life, glowing with lethal energy. They had annihilated every force that dared stand against them. These new arrivals would be no different, but Earth's fleet didn't respond like any other. Instead of forming rigid lines, the human ships broke into small, agile groups. Captain Tony Rodriguez led a squadron of destroyers in an erratic, zigzagging pattern that threw off the swarm's targeting systems. The constructs fired, but their beams hit only empty space. The humans were always one step ahead. All ships, Sullivan broadcast across the fleet, her voice calm but resolute. Remember, we're not going to win with brute force. We're going to outthink them. Commander Sarah Blake led a wing of fighters between the towering swarm constructs. The human ships were tiny in comparison, but nimble and fast, almost impossible to track. Their attacks were surgical, aimed at precise points on the construct's hull's vulnerabilities, too small for larger ships to exploit. On the surface of Xanthus Prime, the surviving Xanthari watched from their underground bunkers. They saw the human vessels taking damage, some trailing fire, others torn open by the swarm's terrible weapons. But the humans refused to retreat. They're mad, a Xanthari scientist murmured. They can't win, yet they won't back down. Admiral Korn stood over the tactical map, his 4 eyes wide with awe. The humans weren't trying to overpower the swarm, they were doing something far more calculated. Strange energy pulses erupted from their ships, not aimed to destroy, but to disrupt, and the machines were reacting. "What are they doing?" he whispered. Aboard the Liberty, Commander Alex Turner led the Cyber Warfare Division. His team moved quickly, launching digital assaults against the swarm's network. "Admiral," he reported, fingers flying across his console, "we're inside their systems. These things operate like computers because they are computers, and humans have been battling those for centuries." Suddenly, the tide of the battle began to shift. The Void Swarm's flawless coordination began to unravel. The constructs slowed, their formations drifting apart. Some simply froze. Others fired wildly into empty space, their targeting corrupted. "By the electronic interference, it's working," Rick shouted. "Their network's breaking down there, losing contact with the hive. They're acting alone." Sullivan's voice cut through the chatter. "Now we fight them one by one. All ships engage at will. Hit them while they're disoriented." With renewed energy, the human fleet surged forward. The constructs were still dangerous, immensely so, but now, they weren't invincible. Human ships began working in teams, one vessel baiting a target, while the others struck at its weak points. But the battle was far from won. The swarm still numbered in the thousands and they were far from finished. The machines were adapting. Slowly, the Void Swarm began to re-establish their internal links, rebuilding the shattered network that had once made them unstoppable. One by one, their movements regained purpose, cohesion, returning as their coordination flickered back to life. On the surface of Zenthus Prime, Admiral Corrin watched the improbable battle unfold, caught between rising hope and deepening fear. The humans were fighting with relentless courage, but they were vastly outnumbered. Their ingenuity had bought them time, but unless they found the swarm's core, the source of its power, it wouldn't be enough. The battle had raged for over 3 hours. Lieutenant Danny Foster gripped the controls of his battered fighter, alarms screaming around him. His left engine was dead, shields gone, fuel dangerously low, but retreat wasn't an option. "Danny, fall back." His squadron leader shouted over comms, "Your bird's coming apart." "Negative, boss," Danny replied, weaving between two towering constructs. "I think I found something." He spent the last hour flying dangerously close to the constructs, hitting blind spots and dodging enemy fire. In doing so, he'd noticed a pattern, something no one else had seen. All the swarm constructs were receiving signals from the same location. Following the data streams had brought him here, a large asteroid drifting just outside the main battle zone. At a glance, the asteroid looked like any other space rock, but Danny's sensors told a different story. It was alive with energy. More than that, he could see the data lines of code and command pulses transmitting outward to every construct on the field. "Admiral Sullivan, this is Foster," he transmitted. "To the Liberty," his voice urgent. "I think I have found their command center. It's buried inside an asteroid designation Alpha 7 on the Liberty's bridge." Sullivan leaned over the tactical display. Sure enough, the asteroid sat at the system's far edge, surrounded by hundreds of swarm constructs. "Confirmed, Lieutenant," she said, jaw tight. "But that's a suicide run. There's no way you'll make it through alive." "All those constructs maybe not, ma'am," Danny said, his voice calm. "But if I can hit that command center, it might shut down the entire swarm." Sullivan felt her stomach twist. Danny Foster was only 23, barely out of the academy, full of dreams and promise. And now, he was volunteering to die for a world that wasn't even his. "Danny, no," she whispered. "We'll find another way." "With respect, Admiral, there is no other way. My ship's not going to hold together much longer anyway. At least this way, it means something." On Zenthus Prime, Admiral Corrin listened to the human transmission, stunned. A young pilot was willingly sacrificing his life for people he had never met. In all his years of command, Corrin had never seen such unflinching, selfless courage. "This is Admiral Corrin," he transmitted to the human fleet. "Lieutenant Foster, your people have already done more than anyone could expect. You don't have to do this." Danny's response came without hesitation, steady and composed. "Admiral, someone called for help. We came to answer. That's just what humans do." Captain Tony Rodriguez was in the middle of leading his destroyers against a cluster of constructs when he heard the exchange. "All ships." "This is Rodriguez," he cut in. "Foster's right. That asteroid's the key. If we can take it out, we end this." "Tony, what are you thinking?" Sullivan asked, already knowing the answer. "I'm thinking we give the kid a shot," Rodriguez said. "My whole squadron will. Punch a hole through the swarm. Get him a clear path." Commander Sarah Blake chimed in over the fleet channel. "My fighters will support the assault. We'll keep those constructs off his tail while he makes his run." Across the fleet, captains and pilots began volunteering. They knew the odds. Most wouldn't survive. But no one hesitated. On the Liberty's bridge, Sullivan watched her people prepare to die for a chance to save others. Her eyes burned with tears. "Very well," she said quietly. Then she spoke to the fleet. "All ships, this is Sullivan. We're punching through the swarm. Foster will make the final strike. Everyone else, your job is to get him there alive." The fleet shifted into a new formation, directing their firepower at a single point in the swarm. Captain Rodriguez led the charge, his destroyers unleashing everything they had. The Void Swarm responded with devastating fire, carving through the human ships with brutal precision. Rodriguez's vessel took a direct hit, disabling half its systems. "Keep going," he told his crew through gritted teeth. "Foster's counting on us." Commander Blake's fighters darted among the constructs like hornets, drawing their fire and disrupting their formations. One by one, the small ships were destroyed, but the pilots fought on, refusing to retreat. Painfully, inch by inch, the humans carved a path through the swarm toward the asteroid. Ships burned, lives were lost. But still, they pressed forward. Behind the chaos, Danny Foster flew his damaged fighter, waiting for the opening. "Foster, you're clear," Rodriguez called, voice strained from pain. "Now's your shot, go." Danny engaged the last functioning engine, his ship surging forward like a missile. He dodged the wreckage of fallen ships, flying low through smoke and fire. The constructs tried to intercept him, but the remaining human forces kept them pinned down as Danny neared the asteroid. He saw it clearly, hollowed from within, packed with alien machinery. Thousands of processors and transmitters lit up the rock's core. This was the heart of the swarm. He armed his last missiles, locked onto the coordinates, and steadied his shaking hands. "For Earth," he whispered, "and for all the people who needed help." Danny's missiles slammed into the heart of the asteroid just as a construct's weapon struck his fighter. The resulting explosion lit up the void, a brilliant burst that flared like a newborn star. The shockwave ripped through the asteroid, obliterating the central command systems that had controlled the swarm. Across the battlefield, the Void Swarm constructs froze in place. Their weapons powered down. Their coordinated movements ceased. One by one, they fell silent, drifting through space as lifeless husks of metal. On the surface of Zenthus Prime, Admiral Corrin stared in disbelief as the same machines that had ravaged his world and decimated his people simply stopped. The skies above, once a storm of mechanical death, had fallen still by the ancestors, he whispered, barely able to speak. They did it. The humans actually did it. Aboard the human fleet, Admiral Sullivan stood silently on the Liberty's bridge, watching the battlefield littered with motionless constructs. The war was over. The Void Swarm had been defeated, but the cost was staggering. Half the fleet had been destroyed or critically damaged. Hundreds were dead, including Lieutenant Danny Foster, who had sacrificed everything to end the nightmare. All ships, Sullivan transmitted over fleet-wide comms, her voice steady but heavy with grief. This is Admiral Sullivan. The swarm is neutralized. Begin immediate search and rescue operations, and send word to Admiral Coran. Tell him it's over. 3 days later, Admiral Kate Sullivan walked through the shattered remains of Zenthus Prime's capital city. Around her, human engineers and Zenthari survivors worked side by side, restoring power and reconnecting water systems to damaged infrastructure. It still took her breath away. Nearby, Medicaren Wilson knelt beside an injured Zenthari civilian, carefully wrapping gauze around the alien's wounded arm. The Zenthari had 4 arms and scaled skin, but Karen treated him no differently than she would any human patient. Not far away, Sergeant Paul Martinez gently guided a group of Zenthari children through the refugee camp, helping them reunite with surviving family members. I still don't understand, Admiral Kuran said, approaching Sullivan. His voice carried a quiet, though he looked worn and weary. There was hope in his eyes for the first time in months. Why did your people come? Our civilizations were never allies. We barely acknowledged each other existed. Sullivan removed her helmet, revealing gray hair streaked with dust, and a face smudged from days of rescue efforts. Her uniform was dirty, her hands blistered, but her eyes remained resolute. Admiral, there's something you should know about humans, she said softly. We have a saying back home, no one fights alone. When your call for help reached us, the decision wasn't even a question. Coran studied her carefully, all 4 eyes searching her face. But you lost so many ships. So many of your people died for strangers. They weren't strangers, Sullivan said quietly. Not to us. They were people who needed help, Sullivan said softly. And that made them our responsibility. News of humanity's unlikely victory spread through the galaxy faster than anyone could have imagined. Across dozens of worlds, leaders gathered around holoscreens and communication hubs, watching reports of the impossible. Human ships fighting with perfect coordination, sacrificing themselves for others, defeating an enemy no civilization had been able to stop. On the ocean-covered world of Aquatica, the Council of Finns held an emergency session. High Counselor Reef addressed the assembly, his voice trembling with awe. The humans have done what we believed no one could. They stopped the void swarm. And they did it, not for glory, but to save people they didn't even know. Similar scenes played out across the stars, in the Regelian Republic, which had been preparing to abandon its core worlds. Hope returned overnight. The Crystal Hierarchy, long silent and aloof, began transmitting diplomatic overtures to Earth. On Forstia, the elusive tree folk who had hidden deep within their ancient forests when the swarm came, emerged to celebrate. But the most profound response came from the Galactic Council, itself composed of representatives from 50 major civilizations. The Council met aboard a neutral orbital station far from any one world's influence. For 15 years, they had rejected Earth's bid for full membership, claiming humanity was too unstable, too violent, too young. But now, everything had changed. Council President Zara stood before the assembly, her blue skin unusually pale with emotion. Fellow beings, she began. We have all seen the footage from the Zenta system. A fleet from Earth's single, modest fleet has achieved what our greatest forces could not. They have defeated the Void Swarm. Gasps and murmurs rippled across the chamber. Representative cliques of the Silicon Collective raised one metallic limb. President Zara, can we trust these reports? How could a species we dismissed as primitive accomplish such a feat? Because they are not primitive, Zara replied with conviction. They may have simpler ships, cruder weapons, but they possess something far greater, something we seem to have forgotten. The courage to risk everything, even for those they do not know. Debate continued for hours, but in truth, the outcome was inevitable. By day's end, the Galactic Council had voted unanimously to grant Earth full membership, with all associated rights and privileges. But more than that, they extended an invitation rarely given, for humanity to assume a leadership role in galactic defense. Back on Earth, Captain Ben Rogers stood in the communications center, where it had all begun. The room buzzed with activity as messages poured in from every corner of the galaxy. Some were offers of alliance, others requests for aid or cooperation. Many were simply notes of gratitude, admiration, and wonder. "Sir," Lisa Martinez said, now wearing the insignia of Senior Communications Officer, "we've received formal first contact requests from 63 civilizations. The Galactic Council wants to establish a permanent embassy on Earth, and 12 species have offered to share their advanced technologies with us." Rogers nodded, taking it all in. "Any threats?" "Surprisingly few, sir," Lisa replied. "Most of the galaxy seems more interested in becoming our friends than our enemies." Rogers wasn't surprised. The battle at Zenthis Prime had shown the galaxy something it had never seen before. Humans, fighting not for conquest, not for profit, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Because it was right. It was a concept many alien civilizations had forgotten, if they'd ever truly understood it at all. On Zenthis Prime, the rebuilding continued. Admiral Corrin stood watching as human engineers tirelessly repaired a shattered hospital. They'd been working non-stop for over 16 hours, refusing to rest while wounded civilians still needed care. Admiral Sullivan approached, her uniform stained with dust and wear. Corrin turned to her. "What will your people do now?" he asked quietly. "You could demand anything of us. We owe you everything, our lives, our future." Sullivan shook her head. "We don't want anything from you, Admiral. We just want to be friends." "Friends," Corrin echoed, almost unfamiliar with the word. For generations, the proud Zenthari had chosen isolation over alliance, convinced of their superiority. Now, that pride had crumbled in with it, a new humility was taking root. "If you'll have us," Sullivan continued, "we'd like to help you rebuild, not just your cities and infrastructure, but your defenses. The galaxy is still dangerous, Admiral, and everyone deserves to be protected." Word of the joint reconstruction spread as quickly as news of the victory. Alien journalists arrived to document the sight of humans and Zenthari, working side by side not as enemies, but equals. The images sparked something across the stars. A new kind of hope. 6 months later, Admiral Kate Sullivan returned to Earth aboard the newly restored ESS Liberty. As the ship approached orbit, she was met with an astonishing sight. Vessels from dozens of alien civilizations waiting to greet her, their banners and lights shining like stars. Earth, the once ignored backwater, had become a beacon, a gathering place, a symbol of something new. In her final report to Earth Command, Sullivan wrote words that would be studied in military academies and diplomatic halls across hundreds of worlds. "We went to Zenthis Prime to save one species. Instead, we reminded an entire galaxy what it means to be human. Our strength was never in our ships or our weapons, but in our resolve to stand beside others. Even in the darkest hour, the galaxy wasn't shaken by force, it was changed by compassion, by the simple truth that no one ever should face the darkness alone."